I'm Mariana Budjeryn. I'm a senior research associate with the project on managing the atom at the Harvard Kennedy School's Belfer Center. I've been here for about 6 years. I first started as a fellow, and now it's been uh, somewhat more than 2 years as I'm a research staff, and I work closely with Matthew Bunn, who's the lead faculty lead on this project, um, researching anything from nonproliferation, nuclear safety, but also crisis dynamics and pathways to nuclear use and how to prevent nuclear use. So I started as a researcher of things sort of nuclear in the Soviet and post-Soviet realm. I have a book coming out on nuclear history of Ukraine, specifically the period from 1991 to 94, when Ukraine inherited nuclear weapons from the defunct Soviet Union, and Ukraine's path towards nuclear disarmament in 1994. And this book is coming out in December, inshallah, fingers crossed. So this is sort of my core area of expertise. I had also investigated how the nonproliferation regime and the nonproliferation norm that's embodied in it affected the pathways of Ukraine, but also Belarus and Kazakhstan, which were the other two non-Russian nuclear inheritor states of the Soviet Union. How this norm, non-proliferation norm, impacted their decision making in the lead up to their accession to the NPT. So I have a rather non-linear and unorthodox career path. I did study political science in my undergrad, but then I worked in a private sector in Ukraine with an investment fund, a venture capital fund for a while, and in market research later on in London and elsewhere. And then I, took some time off to have my family. So I re-entered, or I started my grad school quite, a bit later than normally people in the field. When I already had my kids, I went back for my master's and continued on a PhD. And at that point, I certainly did not have any idea that I would be interested or would end up researching anything even adjacent to nuclear topics. But as it happened, it was really quite accidental. I knew that whatever topic for my dissertation I choose would have to do with Ukraine. And that was sort of my way of contributing to sort of the development of my country, even though I left it, a while before that. So I knew it had to be Ukraine related. Plus, I had, some cultural expertise and the command of the language that I thought would be helpful. And then, in one of the classes, we were reading Nina Tannenwald's Nuclear Taboo. And I thought, as I was contemplating topics for my dissertation, I thought, well, Ukraine, nuclear. Hey, weren't there some nuclear weapons at some point in Ukraine? And that's how I cobbled together a project. First is a comparative study of pathways to NPT accession, why these pathways differed between Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Ukraine. And that was my PhD dissertation. And then when the time came to turn that into a book, this is when Ukraine came back online after 2014, with its new security predicament and Russian threat more pronounced. And of course, questions about exactly what had happened back in the 90s became more pertinent and more interesting. So I decided to make the book more, squarely about Ukraine's denuclearization story and, how the deal was put together and what perhaps consequences this Ukraine story has for the broader nonproliferation regime, what lessons could be drawn. But this is to say that, much of my learning curve about things nuclear was very, very steep. I neither in in my undergrad nor in my grad studies did I actually ever take a dedicated course on nuclear policy, the kinds that you can get at Harvard Kennedy School, Stanford, or a number of other places. And then here I am, years later, steeped in the nuclear topic, and under really unfortunate circumstances, it seems that this is now more relevant than it has been in decades. Well, nuclear weapons are one of the very few things that pose existential threat to mankind, or together with climate change, I suppose that's the only two things that really threaten our civilization and existence on Earth as a species, right? And the world that we have created, if their potential for destruction is taken to their ultimate end, right? So the task is to think and to try and come up with ways to mitigate this danger, right? We live in the world that is laden with nuclear arsenals. And I think it's no secret that after the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union and these non-proliferation successes, especially with South Africa relinquishing its nuclear arsenal, and then the three post-Soviet states disarming, and the Iraqi nuclear program thwarted, in whichever we might disagree in the way that it was, but there seemed to have been a sense of complacency and perhaps a lower public awareness that these weapons still exist. They did not go anywhere, and this nuclear danger really did not abate. And it is right now reemerging in its full and ugly iteration of what is it exactly that bad faith actors can accomplish and can do with nuclear weapons, or can attempt to threaten with nuclear weapons. And so I think it is unfortunate that nuclear topics have become the periphery of a very niche scholarship in the intervening years. It's nuclear geeks and policy wonks who talk to each other in incomprehensible language oftentimes, whereas the consequences of living with nuclear weapons, the consequences of the continued existence of nuclear weapons in the world, are really everybody's business and should be. And I think it is on us as scholars to convey that to the broader public in an accessible way, and without hopefully, scaring everyone out of their wits. But I think every informed citizen of not just nuclear armed states, but of all of the Earth, should have some basic understanding of what nuclear weapons are and what threats they continue to pose. A lot of these threats, including climate change and, of course, nuclear issues, they take a good faith discourse, a good faith discussion, in order to be able to engage, the various differing views, which we are fortunate to have. It's a good thing that we can debate and discuss these issues. And my concern is that the structure of discussion, the structure of spaces in which some of these discussions transpire, may not be conducive to verified good faith sort of actors and good faith information. There's so much noise, right? It happens in the sphere of, social media, of infotainment through television that reaches over to millions, which does not allow nuance, which is very polarizing and dividing, in these echo chambers that are created through social media algorithms. So it's not really on top of how challenging those issues are in the first place to solve for. I'm hoping we can somehow, as societies, configure spaces of interaction and spaces of engagement that are conducive to to finding these good faith solutions rather than the opposite, or the polarizing, of dividing, of deepening chasms, and creating, this this way of basically talking past each other all the time. So I think this is my deepest concern at the moment.